I know this much is true is about family relationships and about mental health issues within families. These relationships that we don't necessarily choose, but that we're born into, and the toll these mental health challenges can bring into our lives. And I was interested in trying to tell it as honestly as possible.
Hey, everybody. I have been really looking forward to this because you have all produced such an impressive series. Because sometimes with really hard material that's painful, you want to turn away, but somehow you guys have made it mesmerizing enough to not want to turn away. And I think that makes it a masterpiece because this is really hard subject matter to talk about. So, Mark, tell us just how you started. I mean, you read, as I understand, you read Wally's book 5 years ago, and then you wanted to bring it to life on the screen. So why?
Well, the truth is that Wally was, the book had been at 20th Century Fox for a number of years, and it was coming out of basically development there. They were trying to make it in the movie, and they couldn't find a way of fitting this book into a 2-hour movie. And so, Wally reached out and queried if I had any interest in producing it, in optioning the material and playing both the characters. I honestly hadn't read it up until then. My dearest friends had all read it, but in my ADHD and my very dyslexia, I had a really hard time sitting down with a book that size. But at that moment, I really took it seriously, and I sat down and I read it, and I was so moved by it, and I related to it in so many different ways, from the Italian immigrant story that isn't about gangsters to the relationships that one has with siblings and how deep those relationships go, and the responsibility we have to each other, and the sense of responsibility we have to each other and our families. And then the mental illness component. Mental illness is something that's in my family. It's something that I've struggled with myself. It's it's rarely ever shown in this life, in relationship to the people who are living with it and the people who are the caretakers. And I just felt it to be incredibly soothing and honest and relatable, and serious and sincere in a moment where this type of thing is rarely ever made anymore. I felt like this was something very special. The writing was so beautiful and relatable. And these are blue collar people. These are the majority of Americans who we see in this show. I mean, in some regard, and you just don't see much like this on television anymore. And I wanted to, I really wanted to bring it to life.
Wally, how did you know that Mark would be such a good fit and that the mental health and mental illness component he would respond to? Did you have an intuition about that, or how did you know that?
Yeah, I was confident that Mark would do a bang-up job because I had seen so many of his other performances, which were, sort of had a sensitivity to them that I think was needed. There was another actor who sort of approached me first about maybe doing this, and I said to my agent, "No, I don't think so." And she said, "Well, who would be your first choice?" And I said, "Well, Mark Ruffalo, without a doubt." And then when Mark expressed interest in doing it in a wonderful email that I got, and he just had committed to it, and he stayed committed to it, and that's how it happened. Mark's first role was that I saw was in You Can Count on Me, And I've been a fan ever since through many of his other great performances. However, I think he really, he just went over the top, playing not only one character, but two. And not only Mark, but also some of the other people who are sitting here, they embodied these people who had just been living in my head for about 6 years. So I was just very, very excited with the results.
Mark, I think that we don't talk much about how many families struggle with mental illness. I mean, obviously, there's a stigma connected to it, but I don't know any families that don't have some sort of mental illness, some version of mental illness somewhere in the family. And so I appreciate your candor in talking about your own experience, but paranoid schizophrenia, it's a particularly intense experience. And so how did you, the people at NAMI say that you nailed it, that your depiction of Thomas as suffering from paranoid schizophrenia is spot on. And so how did you figure that out?
To be honest with you, one of the first things we did when we got up when we started the shoot was I reached out to, or we were prepping, I reached out to NAMI, to Tina Lee, who is is one of their outreach managers in Albany, New York. And she actually introduced me to a gentleman named Richard Weedman, who is living with schizophrenia, and he's around my age, and he's living with it. He's living a life with it, and he's been through the worst of it, and through help and medication and a lot of like cognitive work. He's having a very successful life. And he was very instrumental in helping me to understand it, to see it, and then honestly, in this age we're living in with YouTube, people living with schizophrenia will post, and I watched countless hours of people being really honest about their disease. I don't even like to call it a disease because, we all have these sort of differences that we live with. I'm dyslexic and I have ADHD and I'm have dysthymia. I have a form of depression, and I don't want to think of myself as ill, but people were very candid, and there's a lot of people being very honest about what they're living with, and I watched a lot of that, and I just started to understand what it is to live that way, to have those negative voices constantly barraging you, the exhaustion of trying to differentiate that between, what is reality and then this invasive sort of thinking and hallucinations, auditory hallucinations, even visual hallucinations. And then the paranoia that comes around that, and the sleeplessness, the restlessness. It's just a perfect storm of difficulty, and that really became the basis of Thomas. And then Derek will tell a great story about I was really scared to do it once it happened. Derek showed me a small piece of a video, a documentary about Daniel Johnston, who is a singer-songwriter who was living with schizophrenia. And that was probably, watching his life was probably what really cemented who Thomas was for me and for us.
Wow. I mean, I think that every time we have this conversation out loud, together, it does help take away the stigma, because for so long, talking about any kind of mental health issue, even depression or bouts of depression, have been so shrouded, and people have had so much shame about it. But Derek, since since Mark brought you up, do you want to tell that story of how you were able to help him really nail it?
Yeah, I mean, to shoot the series, when Mark and I first talked about it, we understood that he's going to play twins, one actor playing twins, and we thought about how do you execute that in a way that people actually believe that there's two people on the screen, and how do we set up a process of filmmaking where Mark as an actor can actually become two people through an intense method process, whatever you want to say. And so what we did is we shot all of Dominic, the quote unquote sane brother. But I think, as you watch the series, there's questions whether or not how sane Dominic is as well. And anyway, we shot about 16, 17 weeks with Mark playing Dominic. And then he took 6 weeks off and he went to completely change his appearance. He put on over 30 pounds. He, shaved his head. He started doing all this research. And he came back these 6 weeks later and we shot the other side with Thomas and we were set up. We were ready to go. And Mark was nowhere to be found. And we waited for about an hour and he was in his trailer. So I walked to his trailer and I opened up the door and there was this guy who I didn't recognize because I really got to know Mark by making Dominic. So I had thought Mark was Dominic in a lot of ways. I thought he was this very aggressive, raging, macho, angry, pent up dude, and all of a sudden he was this really small ball of vulnerability in this room. And so I brought him out, finally got him out. We walked to set together. And as we walked to set, there was like a wash of disbelief from the crew who also didn't recognize who this person was. It was September 11th, 2019 was the first day we shot with Thomas. And my AD, Dylan Hopkins, said a prayer. He said, let's have a moment of silence for September 11th. And so the whole crew went silent. And about a minute goes by and we hear this voice. And it was Thomas. And Thomas was saying a prayer for America. And we all looked up and we just listened to Thomas. Mark is Thomas. I don't know if the spirit of Thomas got into his soul and just started speaking through him. But all of a sudden, Thomas was there and Thomas was saying a prayer for America. And it was chilling and poignant because that was Thomas's whole goal in the series in the first place, was like he was trying to stop a war in the Middle East. All of us, everyone on the crew, we never thought of Thomas as a crazy person. We thought of him as a man with a point, with a mission. And sometimes he got distracted from it. And sometimes he was suffering a lot through this affliction he had. But we all loved him and cared for him so much and respected him. And that was crucial because from there on, Mark didn't ever have to play him as a disease or as an affliction. He played him as a person. He was a human being. And I think that's what we really wanted to do with this is, talk about mental illness and the mentally ill as human beings, not just as diagnoses, right? They're actual living human beings. And can we find the heart and soul of the person in there? And I give all that credit to Mark, for showing that to us and being brave enough to find that and find the soul of that person.
One of the things that I learned early on was that, this illness isn't a personality type. It isn't a personality trait. The person is still the person. The illness is or the affliction or whatever you want to call it it sits on top of that, and I think the trap is to play it as a personality type, but they're two totally separate things, and they manifest themselves in some similar ways in people, but in very, very different ways in people as well. But I'm sure that people from NAMI could talk a lot more about that. But the other thing was, all of us had some version of mental illness. As we were casting, as we were working and pulling our crew together, we didn't realize this, but as we were going along, most of us on the crew and the cast have a relationship to mental illness in one way or another.
I was going to say that became one of the missions of the whole series, was to try to destigmatize mental illness, because like you said earlier, every family deals with this from one extreme to another. And I think the Birdsey family, they're dealing it, they have a very extreme case.
And so that leads us to Rosie and to Rosie's character. You struck me in watching your performance as though this role were built for you. You know, I mean, you were built for it, or it was custom made for you. You seemed very fluent in the language of therapy and of mental health. And so tell us your personal connection.
Well, I come from a family that my father's family has severe mental illness of all sorts and all kinds, and including suicides and major depressive disorder, which I'm diagnosed with as well. I always thought I would get diagnosed with bipolar, but my doctor told me I'm too lazy to have bipolar because even my highs are kind of mildly depressed, you know? So who knows? I mean, I have been surrounded by it my whole life. It's the water that we all swim in. Everyone knows what's happening. I've suffered with my own mental illness, my PTSD and major depressive disorder. I also have some anxiety issues. I have some affect of, you know, I take medication and I'm very proud. And it started on Columbine on April 1999 when I couldn't go back to work on TV because I was so overwhelmed by what had happened and really kind of had a breakdown of some sort, or, you know, a breakthrough, depending on who you ask. I also have 5 children who are all adopted. And when people place children for adoption, they're usually in a situation where they're, you know, at the end of their rope. Nobody wantonly or willingly gives away a child. So these children usually come with a series of complications that all start with the primal wound of adoption, you know. So they had all of these issues from their gene pool, and then add another one of you know, the trauma of adoption. So I have one daughter who has suffered really severely, and she's been in and out of mental hospitals. She's 22 years old now. She has a baby. She lives in Wisconsin, but I know what it's like to be the caregiver. So when Dominic was dropping Thomas off at the hospital, I know what that feels like as a family member, to have to go and leave your kid somewhere where they're promising they're going to take care of them. And, you know, you come to find out there is no system set up in the United States, and there's nowhere really to go for help. And thank God for groups like NAMI, because they provide, you know, awareness in a way that no other groups are. So I've been immersed in this my whole life, and it didn't feel like someone else's story. It felt like my own.
And I thought that you were just a beacon, you know, in the series. There are so many people who present as broken. And then your character, Lisa, the social worker, is this high capacity person. You know, you just swing right into action when you encounter Dominic.
Right.
And I thought that, you know, there are a lot of people in this series who tell Dominic to calm down, you know, just calm down, lower your voice. And I sort of was relating to Dominic of course he's wigging out, you know, crazy stuff is happening. But you were this very even-keeled presence, which was really needed.
Right. And I think that if we did a series on Lisa Sheffer, we would come to find out all the mental illness that hides behind her veneer. Everyone has a veneer that they present. And so, you know, we don't know anything about her family. You know, we knew there was a little part with the daughter that we cut out for time, but that's all you knew about her, is that she was a mother and she had a daughter. That's all you knew. But I have fantasized about what their life was and what she was going home to. And it wasn't, you know, perfection by any means. I think you learn to tolerate the extremities of mental illness if you're born at all on the spectrum, and nearly all of us are. nearly all of us are.
Catherine, your character, Dessa, has this, heartbreaking event happen. Just a searingly painful thing. And yet, your character throughout it sort of, I think that you give the impression that she's going to find the light. You feel like she's a hopeful character. How did you feel channeling her?
Yeah, that was those were a series of interesting conversations for sure that Derek and Mark and I had, where it was it's definitely interesting for me to feel like how this person could keep believing in this man. Was an interesting thing for me to try to keep hooking into. And family is family. I mean, when I read this book for the first time, I also felt such a gut check recognition of my own personal experiences, especially as Rosie was saying, that feeling, that whole sequence of when Dominic is when Thomas is brought to Hatch, felt on such a visceral level so familiar. This is intense for me. I just have to say, Derek knows this as well. When he asked if I would be open to doing this, like I also am swimming in the waters of mental illness in my family, and I've always been very protective of this particular person in my life. So I'm not going to mention him by name, but I also want to help relieve the stigma as well. So it's like a pickle, because it's not my story to tell. But I do have somebody that I love very deeply who has schizoaffective disorder. And so I've been able, and also so much mental illness all over my family as well, as Rosie was saying. And this, I think why this story and Wally's writing and the empathy that I knew that Mark and Derek would bring to this story meant so much for me to be a part of, and also through Dessa to find that helplessness as a caretaker for somebody that is going through this and struggling. I really found that so moving and important. Right now, I remember NAMI being such an important resource to me in my 20s when this person was diagnosed. So I want to thank all of you for that. I remember being turned towards books like Surviving Schizophrenia and The Quiet Room by Laurie Schiller, which actually I really found mattered a lot in this material too, because you get to see from different points of access what it is to go through someone that is going through mental illness from everybody's points of view in their lives. And Laurie Schiller is an amazing writer. I remember being handed a tape from somebody with schizophrenia, a cassette tape, that's back when those were happening, that she had made of to the best of her ability, what the voices in her mind sounded like. And I remember that being a real mind opener for me to relate to this person that I loved so much, in how to communicate, because it took us a second, I remember, this is something that I remember as being two questions that had two questions that were, there were two questions in the same sentence, were hard to hang on to for him, this person. So all of that, I think I saw in Dessa as such a place to put all of this as stories are empathy machines. And I knew that this was going to be a place where I could protect this person's privacy and have a place to keep releasing the stigma. I also, with Rosie, feel like with all that's going on right now, I remember when we called the police so many times, and you think you defund those police departments a little bit and put that money into social services. I think it's a great opportunity now in this week to just keep thinking in those avenues. And anyway, I know you asked me a question about Dessa. Blah! There's just so much to say, but
Yeah,
anyway.
there
Thank
really
you for
is.
all the work that you're doing. I want to sob right now. This was a big one for me to release that obliquely, but anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, that is really huge. I know how hard it is to talk about all of this publicly. And is this some of the first time that you are talking about this in such a public way?
It is. I mean, I have said that I have mental illness in my family, but this is as close as I've gotten to. Yeah, I would just want to protect this person, but yeah, it's been like, I think all of us that know it, it's always this, like Rosie was saying, it's this thing that rides along with us um, all the time. As a caretaker of somebody that you love, it's always this feeling of guilt, survivor guilt, and helplessness, and loss, and all of it, of what could have, all the stuff, and just it's big. So I'm so grateful to your organization. That's really was huge for me in my 20s.
So, Dan Gillison, Dr. Duckworth, I guess I'll start with Dr. Duckworth. What's it like for you to listen to everyone talk so candidly about their own experiences with mental illness and mental health in their families, and just how much NAMI has meant to them?
It's a beautiful thing to hear, and just to see how far we have come. All of you are amazing theater stars. I felt like I've taken care of Thomas, worked with Dominic. I feel like I shared a dozen cases with Lisa. I'm going to ask you, if we worked on the same units at any time. I mean, I feel like we are, your portrayals are so real, and your personal sharing about your experience conveys the whole NAMI idea. You are not alone. The system's underfunded. You picked up some nice themes in here, Wally. The doctor who knows Thomas is transferred. The hospital is closed. Mark, I can't thank you enough for saying to your stepfather that this wasn't mom's fault in the way she parented. That's how NAMI actually began, the blaming of mothers for a biological process. So I just want to say you're doing so much good, both on the screen and in this conversation, to share your own experience. When I told psychiatrists who I was applying to be a resident that my dad had bipolar disorder and was intermittently psychotic, it's a long time ago, I wasn't treated very well. And I think you can see now in my field, it's now ordinary to love someone who has a mental health vulnerability. And I think the love of the caregiving is a consistent theme in here. And that's something we see at NAMI every day.
That is so nice, Dr. Duckworth. But I too fastened on that scene that you just brought up. I think that's such a fundamental scene in this series, where Dominic's stepfather says basically something to the effect, if only your mother hadn't coddled him. If only your mother hadn't coddled Thomas, this wouldn't have happened. And then Dominic says, no, it's a brain chemistry. It's his brain chemistry. You know that. He has schizophrenia because his brain chemistry is different. And I think that we've all gotten more sophisticated, obviously, over the decades to understand that. However, isn't it also true that childhood trauma of the kind that Thomas may have suffered does change your brain chemistry?
People used to ask the question, is it nature and is it nurture? And the answer is yes. It's the interface of environment and genes. And so it's very likely, that Thomas had a biological vulnerability, and that particular trauma hit him in a way that may have fostered the development of this neurodevelopmental pathway. We don't really understand it all very well. So it isn't to say that we're biochemical automatons, right? Trauma is real. It's real for every character in this film. I mean, it's amazing how beautifully, the portrayal of trauma is so easy to identify with, whether you're thinking about any of the characters that you connect to for whatever reason. So there is a lot we don't know. And I think one of the things NAMI is interested in is promoting more research. We need a better understanding of these conditions like schizophrenia, so that we can get better treatments. And I think that one piece that is different now, and I do want to mention it, is NAMI advocated for a lot of early psychosis programs. So at Connecticut, there's a brilliant one at Yale, where people who are developing the onset of symptoms get a coordinated, family-engaged self-management training. Dominic asks very early on, what about self-management? It's such a brilliant question. You have to learn to be able to think about your own voices or manage your own self, and really focusing on that in the care. So I do want to say that while we've lost a lot of state hospitals, 3,000 at last count, and a lot of beds, and a lot of people are criminalized, which this also pointed to, there has been a movement which NAMI has helped to lead to get care earlier to people. That when Thomas is sleeping all the time in college and having difficulty, he's in an early prodromal stage before his symptoms are active. If he could have been connected to one of these programs, and there's 300 of them across America now, he would have gotten better care, his family would have been involved. And I think it's likely Dominic would not have been as traumatized because he would have had a place to take it, and again, wouldn't feel alone.
Philip, I feel like your story is really important about the teenage Thomas. So tell us about that. I mean, you were tasked with playing the onset of the schizophrenia. And I was saying that one of the things that I thought was kind of so magical about your performance was how physically different, just like Mark, you looked, even though you were more identical at the time. I mean, at that time, when they were teenagers, these two characters were more identical, but just the elasticity of your face, your expressions were different as Thomas than as Dominic. And so how did you learn how to play the onset of schizophrenia?
I mean, to just be personally honest, my family has experience with mental illness. My brother started to suffer from schizophrenic symptoms in his early 20s. He's 13 years older than me, but I experienced my family trying to deal with it. I experienced his fear, the fear of all of us. And so to me, it was so personal. And I had him to lean on, to ask him about it, plus my own experiences. And it's less trying to do anything with my physicality or making those choices. And it was more for me trying to get in the headspace of both sides of that life. And yeah, I mean, since this show's come out and my family's seen it, I've heard from my brother and I've heard from my dad, both relating to Dominic and Thomas. But to me, it just kind of is something that's really deeply rooted within my family and definitely my own makeup.
Wow, Philip, I didn't know that. And I really appreciate you sharing all of that. Did you talk about all of that during casting? I mean, how did this group of such, sensitive people all come together?
I went into the audition. I felt, beyond just trying to get a part, I felt an inspiration to kind of tell the story correctly, and an importance for mental health to be expressed in an honest way and not stigmatized. And so, I just went in there and did the audition, and then, I met with Derek and I shared that with him. And throughout the process, I've kind of, with my brother's permission, I've shared certain experiences and just trying to use it as a tool. And luckily right now he's doing great. And I just talked to him before I got on this video, actually.
Was it hard for your family, Philip, to watch this series?
It's interesting because, my dad called me. He's been calling me every Sunday after watching it. He's not always so outwardly emotional, and he's been calling me very emotionally and telling me that there's certain feelings from that time period that he thinks he's repressed and not fully dealt with. And for him, he was calling me, and he especially relating to Dominic's anger and how it comes out in different ways, and how he's trying so hard to help someone and he doesn't necessarily have the tools, and how frustrating that can be. And I've seen, I was 9 years old when a lot of this happened, and just to witness my father also just trying so hard to force things to be okay, and not being able to, and the frustration that caused him. And then on the other side of it, experiencing my brother and him in and out of different hospitals, and the kind of progress to find the right medications and to find the best place for him to, as better as he can get. So yeah, it's
Wow.
super personal to me.
I can hear that. And Mark, I know that you're responding to that too. What does all that bring up?
Just how difficult it is for everybody involved, and how scary it can be, and how imperfect our response as the loved ones and the people who are dealing with it are. It is. How much guilt and shame and just sort of chaos is involved in it, and how little we know, and how really little support there really is. And I guess the sense of loss for me, it's like, it's the strangest thing. It's so frustrating because you're frustrated with dealing with it, but you're also more frustrated with the loss, and trying to make those connections to somebody that you're so close to, and how difficult that can be at times.
Yeah, I got that from the series. I mean, watching Thomas slip away, at first Thomas is, sort of a sensitive, quirky. I mean, that scene of them going to the Statue of Liberty, and Dominic having to kind of protect him and deal with him, and Dominic is kind of frustrated, and then through college just watching him slip away and come back occasionally, and you just never knew. I mean, I think that actually Dominic talks about that in therapy, about he remembers back when he was still connected, and what a loss it is when he isn't connected. And I thought you guys did a great job of having everybody feel that loss. And so, Daniel, when you hear everyone talk about this, and are there things to be hopeful? Have things changed since the 60s and the 70s? Or are we still really in kind of a dire situation with mental health in this country?
I think it has changed. I think that one of the things that we try to inspire is hope. And we always try to give hope through the work in the communities. And as we look at the work we do in the communities, we've grown to have over 650 affiliates and state chapters across the United States. So we're in the communities. We're part of the DNA. So we try to be there to provide that hope. And one of the things we provide, for instance, for Dominic, would have been one of our programs called Family to Family. And that is where you have a program that you are with like people. And what we say is we try to meet people where they are. And what we're talking about with our Family to Family is giving them the tools and the opportunity to actually talk about what they're trying to manage through as a caregiver, and then what to look for in terms of resources and support. I think that as Dr. Duckworth talked about, the number of beds, number of hospitals, that's one part of it in terms of what has gone away. But what has come in is some of the kinds of things that NAMI is doing in the communities. And this particular series, kudos to Wally and then to Derek. one writing the book and then directing it. And for us, it's outstanding because it positions mental illness in a conversation. And while we're doing this in technology versus all being together, it's almost much more human, right here and right now. And that's what this series is also doing. It's humanizing and exposing the reality of what many families go through, and the authenticity and the empathy of every character. It was so real. I can tell you about many scenes in terms of for me, the car, getting out of the car, and I mentioned meeting them where they are, meeting people where they are. That moment, Dominic was interacting with his brother as if his brother was just there, and he forgot. Wait a minute. And he jumps out of the car and he runs. Well, when I was watching it, I jumped out of my seat. What I would say to you all is the authenticity that you're bringing across is just fantastic. And I would say that I think that the hope that we try to give the caregivers today is critically important. And one of the things that NAMI is also trying to do is what this was very good for us to see was our social worker. They're stressed that social worker and trauma that social worker takes home every day. As you looked at all of the characters that are providing the mental health support, what support do we have for them? So we're looking at how can we kind of help that group, because one of the things that we know right now is that there's a tremendous demand and there's a low supply, and we need to make sure that we retain those that are doing it and we build that pipeline. The last thing I'll say is the justice work that we're doing. Wally said something earlier, but we do something where we look at the over-criminalization of the mentally ill in the justice system. If we look at our population of those that are mentally ill, they're more in our jails than there are in hospitals. And that's something that we're looking at from the standpoint of how can we impact that. So all of this means a lot to us. And the hope and the tools that we're trying to provide, we just have to look and work upstream, and that's what we're looking to do.
The last question that I had for you, Daniel, was was our original premise that we talked about correct? Is there mental illness in every family? I can't think of a family that I know that doesn't have some touch of some version of it, and yet we so rarely have this open of a conversation. And so is it an exaggeration to say that it touches every family?
No, and I will pass the baton to our chief medical officer in just a second. But what I will say to you all is that 1 in 5 Americans, 1 in 5 suffers with some type of mental illness. And then 1 in 25 have some type of, annually have some type of diagnosed with serious mental illness. So when you talk about that last year, I think it was 11.8 million Americans that were diagnosed with serious mental illness. So when you just think about that 1 in 5, 1 in 5. So you could just look at an audience of 25 people, and then you have 5 that suffer with mental illness. So it is in every family in some manner, way, shape, or form. So and I'll yield the rest of this answer to Ken.
Thank you, Dan. I think it's safe to say the vast majority of families have been touched by mental illnesses. And that's why NAMI is such an amazing organization. You could come join us. The system is underfunded. It's chaotic. It's broken. But we fought for mental health parity so that insurers can't discriminate in terms of coverage. We've helped to set up these early psychosis programs. The idea is this is common and ordinary. Get part of the community that is trying to work the problem. We don't want people in jail. We don't want people dying prematurely. We don't want people feeling that they can't talk about it and get the support that they need. So I would say it's extremely common. Whenever I'm at a college football game, I always divide up the sections in my mind. So I went to the University of Michigan, 100,000 people. It's easy math. 1% of the section has schizophrenia. 3% has bipolar disorder. All those other sections in there, depression, anxiety disorders, panic, addiction, opiate use disorder. And I can get to about a third of the stadium, really, when I think about it. Then you think about all the people that love them. And what you find is this is common and ordinary.
Wally, is this the kind of conversation you were imagining when you wrote your book? Is this what you thought your book would lead to?
I'm delighted that it has. But if you don't mind, I'd like to sort of talk a little bit about my entree into, how I happened to write this book.
Please.
I grew up in Norwich, Connecticut, which housed the largest state facility for the mentally ill. So it was always sort of in the shadows when I was growing up. It wasn't until I was about 16 that I found or was told the deep, dark family secret. Big Italian family on my mother's side, and nobody had divulged that my grandfather had been in the forensic building of that state hospital. Bars on the windows and all that kind of stuff for having tried to kill my grandmother. So that was never talked about, and I never knew my grandfather. But anyway, when I started writing this novel, I didn't realize that I was in some ways reach out and maybe design a grandfather in the vacuum of all that I didn't know about him. Thus, the Italian part of the story within the story. But anyway, the novel was very difficult to start. And it took me a lot of months. And finally, I was ready to go to my writer's group with a certain amount of trepidation and read them the first chapter. And that's the chapter where Thomas cuts his hand off in the library as an anti-war thing. And there was about 6 of us sitting around at a table in a restaurant. And the eldest member of the writing group, a woman named Feeney Ziner, who is no longer with us, she stood, I finished the chapter, reading the chapter, and she stood up and she crooked her finger at me. I knew that she had had triplets and that one of them had become seriously mentally ill. But anyway, while she was shaking her finger at me, she said, "Oh, you're going to take on this subject? All right, then you better get it right, because there's so much stuff in the culture, psycho this, psycho that, and you better do your homework or else, write about something else." And with that, she slapped her notebook shut and she stormed out of the restaurant. And I'm like, oh, it was horrible. It was painful. But you know what? It took me 6 years to put that whole novel together. And in those 6 years, I was always grateful to Feeney Ziner, because that challenge sort of encouraged me to go out and do a lot of research and talk to people, particularly people who had schizophrenia in the family. I didn't know anything about schizophrenia. It's not in my family, but I got a tour of the Norwich State Hospital in its closing days. And at that point, I had started writing Thomas, and I knew that Dominic's anger was sort of a cover-up for his fear that because they're identical twins, the disease may be coming to get him too. And so while I'm on my tour, I stopped a doctor, a psychiatrist, and I said, "Hey, doc," I said, "I've got this character and he's saying this and he's doing this. Give me a diagnosis." And he said, "Sounds like paranoid schizophrenia." And he told me why. And now I had a diagnosis. So it was incumbent on me to learn as much as I could so that I would write it responsibly and not have Feeney Ziner shaking her finger at me.
That's incredible. That's an incredible story. And you obviously achieved it. I mean, you took her words to heart. And I think that you did research it in the fact that it resonates with so many people. And NAMI says that it does from their perspective as well. We're running out of our allotted time, but I just want to go around and see if any of you have any last thoughts to add to everything that we've heard today. So, Derek, your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are, after hearing everyone talk, we all tried to make this story from such a deep personal level, right? And we tried to, all the actors, I'm so thankful to them and so impressed by them, and for Wally for writing it in the first place, and for Ken and Dan from NAMI for coming on and kind of validating all of that means a lot to us, because that's what we wanted to do, was try to pay tribute to those people. So, with all the actors, and so many personal things come up while we're making a movie, and we always tried to just say, let's just pay tribute to our love for our family members in this series. Let's try to do it for them, because a film series, whatever, is a gift. It's a gift to the world, and the world can take it or reject it or do whatever they want with it. And the most beautiful thing that's been happening, we're only halfway through the series, at the point of this recording, but I hear from people all the time who are revealing to me now the mental issue, the mental health issues or the trauma that's been in their family. And what I've always found with art is, the more personal you can make it, the more exposed you can make yourself, the more vulnerable you can make yourself, the more human you are to the world, and the more open you are, and then the world responds to you with that same vulnerability and openness. And so it's been a gift to do this, and to me, this is just a human story, and human beings are complicated, and there's nothing right, and there's no one right way or wrong way to be a person. There's so many different ways, and I just think love and our connections with each other are what will carry us through.
I mean, it's so interesting, right? How the more deep, dark of a secret you reveal, the more you find out there's some universal experience, or that people can identify with it. It's this strange paradox. Philip, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with everybody?
Just going off what Derek said, what's been really special to me is the people who have been reaching out to me while watching the series, and the same thing, them sharing their own personal experiences, and us being able to connect in our emotions, and and just feel less alone in our feelings. And especially right now, I think that it's so helpful to feel connected to people. Everyone is going through so much, and it's been a beautiful experience for me in this crazy time to be able to share in that with people in a way. And it makes me feel good, because the attempt at it, like everyone's been saying, is to try to do it as honestly and with as much heart as possible. And the response that I've gotten has been awesome, and that's all that I could have hoped for. So yeah.
That's so great to hear. I mean, mission accomplished. Catherine, your thoughts?
Well, I would say that I first of all hear the you gentlemen from NAMI about hope. I hear you. That is huge, and something to remember. And just to anybody that's watching this, or that is a caregiver, and the burden of that on a family, and also the unmistakable and intangible joy it is in that relationship with that person that you love. That is all of the hope that you're describing, are those like beautiful glimmers in that human being, and for all of them. And like I said before, art's empathy making. And so I couldn't believe I got to go from the person in my 20s that if somebody said that person is literally insane, and that I would boil with rage because I was so angry at how flip that people would throw around those words, knowing that the actual pain that people were feeling, I was able to go from that into this space of making something like this. And just having empathy space for all of it has been really huge. And just thank you again for having us.
That is beautiful. Rosie, your thoughts?
I was so thrilled to be a part of it. I mean, I thank Mark's wife for recommending me, and I thank Derek for trusting her. And what a group of people to watch it every Sunday night. I'm moved and amazed and just impressed with the skill of everyone involved. And Derek, I think, deserves a lot of credit for creating a family on the set. So not only did we have our families that we were thinking of and drawing from, but we had the relationship that we had just newly made there. That was really because of the space that Catherine talks about. Everyone was sort of open to let each other come in, and it was very beautiful. And my favorite line in the whole show so far has been, Philip, when you said, "You are me." Like the way that was said, and there was this quality, and it just brought me to tears every time I see that. It brings me to tears. You are me, and in a way, that's what we feel with all of our family, and then when you have someone who's sick, it's so sad when you have all the money in the world to help someone, quote unquote, get better. And, there's not enough hospital beds. There's not enough. And, it's easier to get a bed in jail for my daughter than it is for her to participate in her own mental health care, It's tragic, and this series has lifted me in ways during a time where it's hard to be moved. So thank you, everybody. And NAMI, say mommy, NAMI has done so much to help so many, and I hope you realize that. And thank you, Derek and Mark and Catherine and Phil and everyone.
Mark, your final thoughts?
In the show, Dominic feels like he has to do it alone, and out of shame, out of secrecy, out of pride, out of responsibility. But what we see today, this was 20 years ago. We have to remember where this show happens, just about, and it's a different world now. We're not alone, and there's a lot more available to people. I mean, it is a shame that mental illness is criminalized the way it is today, and that we're using prison systems to warehouse people that are really, really sick and don't belong there. That is a real travesty of our society today. It's the outcome of closing all of those hospitals in the Reagan years that put people out into the streets that were so sick, that needed so much help. That turned into a huge homeless problem. All of this is relatable, but the fact of the matter is we're not alone. This show shows us we're not alone. I hear time and time again, "Thank you for telling the story. I thought I was alone." It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's everywhere, and there is places for help. There are programs that didn't exist back then, and our understanding of these issues, of this illness, is so much more profound than it was at the time that Dominic and Thomas were living through it. And so I guess I want to say, you don't have to do it alone. And there's no shame in asking for help. It's the journey that Dominic has to make to be able to receive and ask for help, and to forgive himself for something that's completely out of his control, something that can be so shameful if you internalize it. And there are people everywhere that are dealing with this. And so, I would say, use these resources. You don't have to carry this alone. And people are better in community than they are in isolation.
I know your words are going to help so many people. All of your words are going to help so many people. I mean, it's really helpful to hear successful, talented people talk about their struggle with this. And I know that everybody who's tuning in is going to be so appreciative. Daniel, any final thoughts?
Yes, thank you to the artist. Your art is profound. I never believed that I would have the opportunity to interact with you all in this most human way. Rosie, I watched your shows for years, and you always were so authentic. Mark, your roles have been very authentic, and you've done a lot of work in the justice system in terms of some of the roles you've taken on. All of this goes to every one of you all as artists. One of the things that I always say is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And every one of the people I've just met today and had the opportunity to actually interact with you, one, I never thought I'd have that opportunity, but it indicates to me how much you care. And for that, I appreciate you more than you could ever know. I think vulnerability is also a strength. It is not a weakness. The more you share, the better. And this show it shares, it's very authentic. And as you go through the series, I mean, this is so real and so authentic, but that's because of your art. Rosie, the last thing I'll say is you shared something today that also is one part of that is that your children are adopted. My wife's adopted. I didn't realize the impact of that until she was expecting our first child. We went to the doctor and the OBGYN says, tell me your medical history. And she says, I don't have one. Where am I going with that? That was an exposure then to this conversation now from the standpoint of being vulnerable, being open, and sharing. So people don't care how much you know until you know how much they care. And to all of you all, thanks for caring. I really do appreciate it. NAMI appreciates it very much.
Dr. Duckworth?
Yeah, thank you. This has been an amazing conversation to be part of, and I want to thank each of you. I feel like you really get it. And a lot of people identified with you before this performance, and will now connect with you both through your extraordinary talent, but also telling a story they can connect to. And I guess my final thought would be, is this a challenge? This is a common challenge. But if you can come together and connect with a group like NAMI, which is into education, support, and advocacy, we got to fight for better services, better resources, better training. There are some new treatments coming out, but they're hard to get. And again, this is a funding challenge, an advocacy challenge. The Brits have figured out a way to talk to people about their voices called cognitive behavior therapy for psychosis that we don't have in the States. We just don't have it. But it was a whole sophisticated way of helping people think about their hallucinations critically. The idea you don't have to believe things, if you can't generate evidence to support them. And this is both works for the individual like Thomas, for the family member like Dominic. And it has good evidence. And so there are examples of ideas that we have to fight for to get here. And I just want to say there's a few treatments that, every year at the NAMI convention, somebody comes up and gives me a big hug. There is a medicine which was coming out in the early 90s called clozapine. That is the only FDA-approved medicine to do treatment refractory psychosis and reduce self-harm and suicide. It's FDA approved for both those things. What's interesting about that treatment is very few people are on it. And so if you told me, there was leukemia and there was a treatment that worked for half the people really, really well, but virtually no one could get it, I'd say that's an advocacy concern. And I call it the clozapine hug. And, I get it every year at the convention because I'll have said to somebody, Thomas is acting on his arm because of delusional beliefs, right? That is a symptom that can be treated. And while I can't give medical advice out of the blue, just check out this treatment, which came out about the time the film is set and has remarkable evidence for its efficacy in some people. Very humbling line of work. We don't know who's going to respond. But if you don't try it, you're not going to have a chance. So just look into that medication. Talk about it with your psychiatrist because his self-harm was driven by undertreated symptoms. In a lot of cases, that really doesn't have to happen.
That will be so helpful, Dr. Duckworth. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure people listening will look into that. And so, Wally, this all started with you. This was your germ of an idea. And so what are your final thoughts?
Well, this is an old book. It was published back in 1998, and I've received many, many letters about this and my other stories. And I keep most of those letters in these big plastic bins in my office. But I also have a little folder of the very special letters. And most of those are written from people who have schizophrenia in their family and read the book and were writing to say thank yous and also to tell me about, some of the episodes of their family. And those are precious gifts to me. They're far more important than any royalty checks or anything like that. I would also like to close by saying that, like Rosie, I have an adopted son, and he has mental illness. And so groups like NAMI have been very, very helpful to us. And so much so that when this book was going to be published, I had to sort of take on my publisher so that I could mention NAMI after the last chapter and invite people to donate to this very worthwhile organization. So I'd like to thank HBO because I was delighted when at the end of the first episode, I saw the plug for NAMI and have seen it every episode since. I think that's really an important thing. I think NAMI throws a lifeline to a lot of people who are suffering and pulls them back out of the water. So thank you. And thank everybody. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
I did too. And I know that all of the people who are tuning in are really going to be grateful for everybody's candor and honesty during this. And so for anybody who's watching, if you haven't seen the limited series yet, it is, I know this much is true, it's a limited series on HBO. I highly recommend you watch it. And I think this conversation will help people so much. So thank you, everyone, all of the talented cast, director, author, doctors. I really appreciate you having such an unvarnished and important conversation right now. Thank you.
It's okay to think you're in a toxic relationship with the world right now.
It's okay to be depressed.
It's okay if it's hard to find the words to express how you feel.
It's okay if you're feeling more cynical than usual.
It's okay if you're panicking over an inability to control your life right now.
It's okay to have trouble maintaining your normal routine while staying home.
It's okay not to feel the most fabulous right now.
It's okay if you want to curse more than you usually do.
It's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay.